And how much CO2 is emitted when producing biochar? Ideally, there's no CO2 emitted when you produce biochar because it's a closed system. But of course, you can never have a perfect system. So let's put it very, very high at maybe 10%, but 10% of the carbon which was actually in the original biomass. If we upgrade biochar to biocoal and use it as a fuel, do we lose the CO2 negative aspects? Yes, we do. But it can be a step on the way to vulgarize, popularize biochar. If the biochar is used in country one, while the fuel and production is used in country, where can the company get credit for it? The thing is that that's one of the problems with this system is that you can get credits several places. You sell the credit on the international markets. So you find a broker, they call aggregators, at least in the US. You say, I have this negative technology. I work within this industry. And then they'll send you a list of requirements that you have to live up to. And then you should sell it. Then a third party has to certify it. And this system is not well put into place yet. But with all the voluntary market schemes, then we see that they're being called pre-compliance markets. So that means that the nations and international organizations are using the systems that are made by voluntary people, or the free market, so to speak, and being implemented. But it's still under construction, so it's far from perfect. How much do you...
One more point can I add to it?
Yes.
If you can go to the slide where there was the taxes in the different countries.
Absolutely.
One of the initial.
Yeah, I can go all the way back.
Yeah, this one.
Yeah. But I think it's bigger here. Yes.
Yeah. So let's say there is biochar which is being used in produced in Denmark, and the fuel is used in Denmark, and the biochar is used in Sweden. Yeah. And then if there is the voluntary trading market, but there is this carbon price that I see here, and there must be some other company in Sweden, let's say IKEA, which is producing certain amount of emission. Yeah. So will it be possible, for example, for Sweden to reduce its carbon cost, for a company like IKEA in Sweden to reduce its carbon cost by tying up with a company which is just producing biochar and selling it to maybe a different company? It's just is it a business case for the people who are paying the price? Like if somebody in Sweden is paying a price for the biochar, for carbon emission, can they tie up with somebody else who is doing something in Denmark, or somebody is doing something in Germany or something?
Great question. You only get the carbon credit once, ideally. So it doesn't matter who owns it. If I produce biochar and sell it to IKEA in Sweden, if I apply for having a certified CO2 removal technology, carbon removal technology, then I get the certificate. But I can sell that certificate to IKEA and they can use it. So I don't know if that answered the question, or if it was a little more complex than that. Krishna, did it answer the question, or was it?
Yeah, just to repeat it, like, for example, if a company in Sweden planted a lot of trees in Africa, yes, will that reduce the carbon tax that they have to pay?
Yes.
That's like if they do biochar in another country, it would be similar. Like if they just did a lot of biochar in Ghana, for example.
So the good thing about the carbon trading system is that we have one world. So no matter where you save the emissions, it doesn't matter. You can use it on any market. So
the carbon tax, this carbon tax.
Yeah, so the carbon tax, the carbon tax is where you emit it. So if you emit, if you use 1 liter of oil in Sweden, you have to pay the carbon tax in Sweden. I don't know what the rules are if IKEA produce, what's it called, greenhouse gas emissions in other countries. I think it's maybe case by case. I don't know, but it's a really good point, and I'll look at it if I want to torture myself one time. Is that enough, Krishna, or do you want to know more?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you.
Then you're welcome. Malte, how much CO2 is offset by sequestering 1 ton of carbon? Melde, I think you can. I can show you this slide. It's 3.6 times. Here we go. So when you have 1 ton of biochar in the ground, then it offsets 3.6 tons of carbon in the atmosphere, minimum. And actually, this minimum could be a little bit lower, maybe 3. But if you take into account everything that it replaces, it should be much higher. But in principle, 1 ton of CO2, if you look at how much 1 atom of carbon weighs and how much a molecule of CO2 weighs, then it's 3.6 times bigger mass. Yeah. And Tom, how do we stop people from selling the same carbon capture multiple times? Excellent question. So that is that once you apply for a carbon removal certificate, then there's a lot of, it's an excellent question because there's a lot of trust in the system. When you have a third party, an auditor that says, yes, this project is okay, it's approved, then you get the certificates. But I mean, there will be scandals and people who want to cheat the system everywhere. So that's work in progress, and it's been a problem already. So maybe the Paris Agreement has something better there. And Paul, how do we prove and measure the amount of carbon trapped to sell it? Well, I think that's also a very relevant question, and you can measure the amount of carbon in biochar. So I guess that's just it. You take a little piece of carbon and biochar and see how much carbon is in it. Does that answer the questions? If I didn't answer any questions fully, please write in the chat, and I'll come with a more in-depth answer if I have it. Otherwise, I'll look it up and get back to you. Yeah. Well, then, Krishna, is anybody selling biochar in Denmark to cattle, for example? Great question. Biochar in Denmark is a tragedy. So for some reason, Sweden and Norway are doing a lot. We even have the Stockholm example, where all you have to do is copy it. We're not selling biochar in Denmark at the moment. All there is one small woman who sells biochar for horticulture over in Ry. That's a very small town in Jutland, and that's it. But so nobody in Denmark is selling any biochar besides her. Yeah, that's why I think that's a huge market, a huge opportunity, and we really needed to get started today. And all we need to do is look to our Scandinavian brothers and sisters and copy that system. That's what I believe. Yeah. Let's see. Can you give an estimate of the upper limit of the amount of CO2 1 ton of biochar production could capture? An upper limit. You know what? In theory, I couldn't give you an upper limit because if you take 1 liter of oil and sail it around the world infinite amount of times, it would be an infinite output. But let's be practical and realistic. Then the upper limit, then my best estimate would be the one that I got from Met Energy, which is 1 barrel of bio oil can offset 10 barrels. So I'm not more knowledgeable than you there. Oh, how much biochar can you put in the ground? Imagine there's a limit. Also, how long does it take for it to degrade? Thank you for the great question, Søren. Biochar, you can put it in, let's see, how much biochar can you put in the ground? Basically, you can make a big mountain of biochar if you want to. That's not a problem. But the interesting part is that you can put biochar everywhere. You can put it in the soil. You can put it in building material. So that means you can build bridges where biochar is a material, skyscrapers where biochar is a material. So there's really no limit to how much biochar you can have. The limit is to the amount of biomass. So then the old, outdated calculations say you can only have 1 to 2 gigatons of biochar based on the biomass in the world. But the new calculations, if you take into account all the biomass in the seas, such as seaweed, then you can produce 70 gigatons of biochar. So there's really no limit at the moment. Yeah. Yes. Krishna, great questions as always. How does the economics work in Sweden? who pays for the biochar, and the carbon benefits. So that's why I wanted to share the three success stories to give an idea. So who pays for it? Yeah, so if you look at Sweden, they have this Stockholm project. And the main taker of biochar in Sweden are the municipalities. So they buy the biochar and plant it around urban trees. Then the trees get much healthier, and it also works as a stormwater system. So when it rains, there'll be a lot of pollutants coming into the ground and then keeping on to the leakage system or the systems with water. So basically the municipalities and the carbon benefits, who pays for them? That could be companies that want to offset their carbon, or it can be companies that are part of this allowance system, and then they pay for more allowance. But the thing is, at the moment, we have too many allowances, so it's not really the best place to start, I would say. It's much better to look at voluntary carbon schemes and see if you can somehow get approved there. If a company A produces 20 tons of biochar, what should it do to get the most money out of it? That's an excellent question. I don't have the answer for it. But hopefully there's some inspiration for it today, and you can find out. And also it's a case by case. So the local use of biochar is the best. And I mean, if you are in charge of a big forest, put the biochar in the forest and make it great. If you're just a profit for profit company, then maybe, you know, upcycle it to biocoal pellets and then sell it as coal, but then it'll just be CO2 neutral. Still much better than burning charcoal from the ground, but less climate positive. That's just ideas. I don't know. There's not a one solution fits all there. And I would put it on the cattle market. Use it, sell it as animal fodder, because it's an established market, and it's easier to penetrate or to enter, I would say. Just to understand in Sweden, so biochar is to be sold to the municipality or cattle fodder, and carbon credits to companies to reduce their taxes. Biochar is to be sold to municipalities, correct. I don't know the market for cattle fodder in Sweden, but I think that's a great way to start, because there's a lot of success in Austria and the surroundings, and we relate to those countries and Switzerland. And for carbon credits to companies, to reduce their taxes, I would say to reduce their expenses, because just legally speaking, we make a difference between taxes and allowances. So it's not to reduce the taxes, it's to reduce what you pay for allowance. Yes, great question from Soren. And Soren, can you just write who you are, because you have all these great questions, and I don't know who you are. I wonder, how can the pyrolysis process emit less CO2 compared to natural degradation or waste? I imagine that it could make sense only with renewable energy. So this is, once you understand what pyrolysis is. So pyrolysis is that you have a closed system. You take the biomass, put it into a big oven, and then then you heat it up in the absence of oxygen. So when you heat things up with oxygen, carbon binds to oxygen and makes CO2, which is then volatile and goes into the atmosphere. Good, Søren Philemon, but are you a student in the exec course, or are you from somewhere else? Yes, thank you very much. But if you heat up biomass with carbon without oxygen present, then you simply cannot have a CO2. There's no oxygen available. So then, instead of carbon binding to oxygen and going to the atmosphere, the carbon stays in this biochar. That's the trick. And this process is also thermal. So these thermal processes, they seem to generate a lot of energy. And why that is, I wouldn't be able to say, but that's just how it is. And you even produce excess energy depending on what biomass you enter. So the higher the energy level in the biomass, the more excess energy you can utilize. And if it's very moist, so if it has a lot of water in it, you need a lot of energy to evaporate. But yeah, did that answer the question, that it's less CO2 to natural degradation? No CO2 is formed. There's no oxygen to react with. So once you start the process, and thank you for all these questions. I'm so happy that I spent so much energy and time on something and people are interested. So once you start the process, so I guess you use some energy at the start, it's able to sustain itself and keep the high temperature necessary for the pyrolysis. Exactly. So that is the trick. You need for combustion this spark in the beginning, but that's quite fast. You can use a lighter or flamethrower if you want to be really cool, and then the process is started. But I guess you can just have some syngas in the end. So one of the end products was gas. It could be methane, CH4. And then you keep that barrel for the next time you start the pyrolysis. Then you just take the gas, use your flamethrower, and the process is set off. Is it feasible to build a small-scale pyrolysis system in a Skylab context to start experimenting with it? Yes, it's possible to build a small-scale pyrolysis system in a Skylab context to start experimenting with it. And let's do it together. And there is also microlegatet that gives up to 25 or 50,000 kroners. So let's build that, but not inside, outside. Yeah, outside. Otherwise, yeah, fire and so on. Yeah. Let's see. I guess one additional point could be that in natural degradation, bacteria eats the biowaste to produce CO2. And in pyrolysis, we want to convert the biodegradable waste or non-degradable form so that it remains stable for several hundred years. That's great. Excellent, Krishna. Good to have you as an angel helping out. Paul, do you know why biochar has all these positive effects on cattle? I mean, it's just carbon. Great question. Yes, we do know. So biochar is not good for people, but for ruminants, they have a system that people know extraordinarily well. And when I was a biology teacher, we also spent time teaching animal digestion, which I thought was a little weird. But the thing is that biochar has these adsorbent effects. So it's like a sponge for pollutants. So when you take and add a little bit of biochar to the food, then when it gets in the digestive tract, then it absorbs or adsorbs, because it's to the surface, different pollutants or things in the digestion that gets changed into other things. Yeah, maybe the answer was a little bit unclear, but the idea is that it can absorb pollutants and then the animal gets healthier. But if you give the animal medicine, then you should not give it biochar at the same time, because then it'd be if you use biochar while you give medicine, it'll also absorb the medicine. And let's see, could it be linked to nutrients trapped into it too? I don't think it's linked to nutrients being trapped into it. At least from what the articles I read, that's not it. And a lot of this research, so to speak, is based on observations. So we just see that farmers who give biochar to their cattle, they observe they spend less money on veterinarians, they need to feed them less, higher growth rate, all these things. And then, yeah, I know you're a physicist, so it's just, we can observe something, come with a theory, and then we can test it. But I haven't seen any theories put forth with the nutrients trapped into it. But at least for the adsorbents, yeah. Because you can see that the pollutants, if you measure the biochar afterwards, you can see that these are there. And the poo is also more solid. And yeah, I don't know why that's so important, but the people who work with it think that's very nice. Oh, maybe it's when you have to clean the stables, it's nice that it's not a big puddle. I can imagine. Krishna, is cattle use well proven? Yes. We have a little cattle farm. No, sorry, you don't have a little one. We have a cattle farm next to our factory. Is the quality of biochar a concern about it? Yes, it's very important that the biochar quality is good. I'll get back to that. Are there major negative effects that may happen to the cattle? If you give biochar to cattle while it's on medication, you'll have a bad effect because the medication will be absorbed. But besides that, I haven't read about it. I mean, the amounts that people give is very little. It could be from 0.5% to maybe 5% of the total amount. So I don't know if something bad happens if you give it a lot. I would have to get back to you. But the quality of biochar is, of course, very important. So it's a bit like if you have sewage sludge and there's a lot of pollutants in it, then if you only have a pyrolysis which is at 200 or 300 degrees, you'll still have a lot of pollutants in it. And giving that to the animal, then I wouldn't be able to say now if the animal then ingests these pollutants. But if you have a high temperature pyrolysis at 600 to 700 degrees, then basically all pollutants will be evaporated or volatilized, and the heavy metals will be very strongly bound in the biochar if they are present. But the thing is that I don't know how it works inside animal digestive tract. I just know that if you put biochar with heavy metals in the ground, it stays there indefinitely, at least for now, because we have a part in Denmark where there's a lot of zinc in the ground, and so far it doesn't leach out. But of course, maybe above a certain limit, it will leach. We just don't know yet. And if you want to produce a pyrolysis system, we can produce it at my place. We can make a simple one, which is just a barrel in a barrel. Let's see here. In carbon credits, good to hear from you, Eric. In carbon credits, does it matter where you get the biomass to produce biochar? Great question. I guess the impact wouldn't be the same between getting it from a byproduct of agriculture, for instance, and cutting down a living tree which would decay until it died. Great question. So for carbon credits, I would say the simplest calculation is when you have 1 ton of biochar, you have efficiently removed, stored 3.6 tons of the carbon from the atmosphere. But of course, if you cut down a tree which already held that carbon, that's a really good question. I just think the system isn't good enough yet. So unfortunately, I would say it's a breach in the system that you say, we take this carbon and then you write an application. The person on the other side maybe doesn't know enough and could approve it. But if you follow the international guidelines from the IBI and the EBF, then it has to be bio-waste. You cannot cut down a tree which already holds carbon. So the short answer is use bio-waste. Don't use trees. Unless you can also grow, what's it called? Super greens. It's not the technical term, but it's grasses that grow very fast that you use for biofuel. If you have, it could be sporgum. If you grow this and then pyrolyze it, then you could argue that you've done something good for the environment. But if you cut down a tree, which will hold it for 100 years or 10 years in Sweden, that's not good enough. So it depends on the system. Thank you, Eric. As temperature has an effect on the biochar degradation, low temperature, organic, eaten by organisms, is it taken into account for the certificate and carbon credits? I would say yes. But the thing is that the carbon credit system at this point is very immature, so it's very much case by case. But if you follow the guidelines from the European biochar certification process, then you're well on your way. And thank you very much. It was a great pleasure with the questions and being able to share what I've been working on.